when Pearl Harbor come along, I after it was bombed, I enlisted in the Air Force. And when I went, by that time I had a 1939 Plymouth sedan, and this was 1942. And had a Plymouth sedan, and I had this brand new golf clubs. Well, they were a year old by then. And so I told Kenny and Keith, I said, you can drive the car and just keep gas in it, and if you get a flat tire, be sure to fix the tires and everything. And I was trying to keep it in good shape, if you will. And you can play with the golf clubs all you want. All I want all those clubs there when I come back. So they said, fine. But I said, you're welcome to use them, I don't care. They're no good just sitting around. So when I come back, I noticed the 7-iron was different than my clubs, and I said, what happened to the 7-iron? And I said, we let Topper Scott borrow one day, and he lost the 7-iron. So he was over at Rackham Golf Course, and there was Joe Louis happened to be there. There was having a big day for him, having a celebration, and this was before Topper enlisted in the Navy. And he saw a 7-iron, I think it was in Joe Lewis's bag, and he took that 7-iron and took it home and put it in my bag. And when I got home, I had a 7-iron. They said it belonged to Joe Louis. I said, wow. I said, how am I going to get this back to him? And they said, no, you're not going to do that. That'd be silly to take it back now.
So who is Joe Louis?
Joe Louis was a world famous, one of the most famous boxers of all time. He was the world champion for years and years and years. He got beat just before he was champion in 1936 by Max Schmeling, a German. And then we went to war with Germany later, but Max Schmeling always thought the world of Joe Louis, and he never was a Nazi. But Joe Louis became champion, and he beat Schmeling again in 1938, 2 years after he got beat. That was the first time Joe Louis had ever been knocked down by another boxer, and that was by Max Schmeling. But Joe Louis went on to be a wonderful black boxer, and he was a Detroit boy. He was born in Alabama, but he moved to Detroit when he was a young kid. And but that was something to have a 7-iron that belonged to Joe Louis. I couldn't believe it. I can't remember what happened to that club.
How was the car when you got back?
The car was in decent shape. They weren't making cars anymore. They weren't manufacturing the cars, so I'd only paid, I think, $300, $250 or $300 for the car, and I drove it for a couple of years, and I came home, and the car was in decent shape. We drove it for a while, and I finally sold it to a soldier there in Battle Creek. Helen and I had married and moved to Battle Creek for a while, and until I was discharged in September of 1945. But I sold that car then for $500. It was barely running then, and the car, Howard Hamilton was real funny. He was a boy that I'd known all my life from Hazel Park. He had been wounded he had been in the Rangers. He'd been wounded after D-Day over in Europe. He was wounded in the leg, and I had been wounded in the arm. And so we were bunkmates out at Fort Custer after we left Percy Jones Hospital. And he'd ride home with me when I'd come home to Hazel Park. He'd ride home with me, and later he was the president of a Warren Bank. And a wonderful man. He died quite young, when he was 59, but he was with me when I was selling this car to this young soldier. And this soldier was driving the car, and he would hardly get up a hill, and hardly have nothing. And Howard says, "You're going to sell this man this car?" He said, "I don't think you ought to do that, Glenn. Be fair to him." And the guy said, "Don't listen to him." He said, my dad's a master mechanic. He said, "He can fix anything." And he said, "I need a car." And he said, "They're not building cars right now." So he said, "I need a car." So he said, "It's a good buy as far as I'm concerned." And so I said, "I'm glad you've got that attitude." Because I told Howard later, I said, "You ruined the sale for me." He said, "I just told you what came out of my mouth, just what I was thinking." And I said, "I was thinking the same thing. How could I ask this man to buy this car?" But he bought it, and I got $500 for it. But I had to buy another car, and didn't get a very good buy either.
We're going to intercut this with some of the pictures of the houses that
Yeah.
Dad took.
Oh,
Maybe
yeah.
you could just give a 1 or 2 minute description of the house, or
Yeah.
how much you paid, if you can think of it, or why,
Yeah.
and how it came about that you
Yeah.
bought the houses you bought.
Yeah, start in order.
Okay, Mike and Diana are with me, and we're discussing some of the houses that we lived in Hazel Park. When we first moved to Hazel Park, we lived on Maxwell Street, and I'm not even sure that house is still there right now. Then we moved to a house on Evelyn Street, the next street north of there, and we lived there for a few years when I was quite young. Then we moved over to a house on Myers Street, in East Myers in Hazel Park. That was a bigger home. That was the biggest home we'd been in. It had 2 floors, and that was in I think it was 1930. I'm sure it was. Floyd was away to college, and he graduated from Hazel Park High School in 1929, and he went to Elma College for 1 year. That's all my dad could afford to send him. He went as a freshman, and he completed a year there. So that was 1930, we lived there. Then we moved over to right across from the Nine School. We lived on Harry Street. And just a coincidence, a family lived on the street on the corner. Their name was Cheek, who Diana knows some of the Cheeks now. She knows Tom Cheek, who was the son of one of the boys that lived on the street from me. Father's name was Melvin. But there was a family of, I think 5 boys lived there. And then behind them they had a cousin named Cheek. His name was Lamar Cheek, and he had a younger sister. But that was just a coincidence that they lived that close to us. But I still know some of the Cheeks. I heard that Lamar just died fairly recently. And Helen, my wife, knew him real well, and she said that he's one of the most handsome boys she had ever seen, and I agreed with her. Probably the best looking. He and Doug Sheets, probably the best looking boys I ever knew in Hazel Park High School. But we moved there, and I think it was 1931, and we just lived there a short time. Then we moved to Granite Street when I was 10 years old. Just another coincidence, the Scotts lived right next door to us again. Before they'd lived in back of us, now they lived next door to us. And I loved that because every day I had playmates just right next door to me. We ran all over town together, Bunn and Bull Scott and Verge. But there was a man that moved into the next block on toward John R. It was west of us. His name was Oscar Jordet. He was a man in his mid-30s. He moved from the west side of Detroit to Hazel Park, and he saw all of us boys playing ball, and he said, "Boy, you boys really play good ball." He said, "You're terrific." He said, "You ought to have a ball team and have some opponents." And we said, "We ought to, but we can't. We can't afford it." And so he had a good job, and he didn't have any children, and he loved kids. So he bought 10 jerseys. They were orange. They had black cuffs and a black band around the collar. And the hat was black with an orange bill. And so he said, "I can only afford 10 of them." And he said, "I got a few bats and balls." And he said, "I used to live on the west side of Detroit. We can get a team to play against there." So we played a couple of games against them. And we played over at United School Ground, which was about, not more than a quarter of a mile away. And he said, I was the youngest kid on the team, and he said, "I can only afford 10 of these. I only carry 10 players."